Hello, everybody. Welcome to Starfleet Tactical. I, of course, am Chris. I'm here with Pat, as I am most days when Pat is not off flying his airplane someplace. So, hey, Pat, how's your week been?
Busy week. Just been doing work for my other job most of the day, which I was basically taking a class all week on essentially, let's say, administrative matters in the in the Navy. So that's what I was doing all week. Just one giant Zoom class here at, or I guess it's Microsoft Teams is what we use right now. So
yeah, if there's anything that can make Navy training better, it's doing it on Microsoft Teams.
Well, in some ways, it's actually pretty good because the Navy doesn't have to pay me per diem. I don't have to spend one extra day flying out to the East Coast and an extra day flying back at the end of it. And they don't have to spend money to put me up in a hotel. You don't, but you also don't get the, meet people face to face and talk to them and, the side conversations and actually meeting new people that you would normally get from that. So, it can be a mixed bag on as far as all that stuff goes, but on the plus side, I got to be home for it and sit in my own comfortable desk and use my office and sit in my nice comfy chair. So, but they made us put on the uniform. So when we had to muster and, be in uniform. So, neighbors probably saw me walking out of my house, changing the trash cans or, random little things throughout the day. And why is Pat in the military uniform sitting home by himself?
Did they make you stand up to show that you were wearing the pants?
No, but I did wear the pants just to be on the safe. Yeah, just to be on the safe side. Well, and it prevents me from performing some form of embarrassing faux pas too. I think it's just good practice to wear pants.
Well, I meant the Navy pants in particular.
Yes, and those I was wearing.
So way back when I worked in the Pentagon, I heard a story about a Marine who had two pairs of pants. He had the ones that he was like normally wearing, and then he had a separate pair that he kept in his office that were his walking around pants. And he would literally, if he was going to go walk around in the Pentagon and go someplace else, he would change his pants into ones that he had not been sitting in, so they weren't showing creases from sitting in.
Yes. This is a Marine? Did you say this was a Marine?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, but they are some of the most squared away people you will meet.
Oh yeah.
In most cases. So
I love the Marines. I love them, but they're just a little bit crazy.
I can, crazy, and God love them. I was just out walking on a sidewalk on a base years ago, and there were two young Marines, and they were walking towards me, and whoever the senior one between the two, I could hear her very quietly, prepping the other person so that they saluted perfectly in uniform, and I hear just a very subtle hand salute, and they came up, and I mean, I was very impressed. So have you? I've always wondered if in Starfleet you have something that I heard that that sometimes happen with Navy enlisted, that they'll see an officer coming towards them, and they'll purposefully break the group up and spread out to make the officer salute each one of them individually. I've never seen that. At least it was a plan to salute. But no, I mean, it's always like, I don't know, if you get a bunch of people congregating outside for some reason, there's just a bunch of officers and enlisted. I mean, someone could lose an eye at some point.
Yeah.
So, at some point, if everywhere you turn, someone's saluting you, it gets a little silly.
That's why, like, the bus stop outside the Pentagon is a no salute zone.
Okay. Yeah.
Although I think, if I remember correctly, it's not a no salute zone for all the services. There's individual service memos that designate that. And so you sometimes end up in various situations where like a member of one service is saying like, you owe me a salute. And the other one says, no, sir, not our regulation says, our guidance says we don't have to salute in this area.
I've never been in the Pentagon. I have been within a few hundred feet of it. I'm trying to think what the radar altimeter said. I've flown directly over it, going into Reagan National, or very close. I don't remember exactly what the radar altimeter said. I think they switched my runway at the last minute.
Off course.
What's that?
If you were directly over it, you were off course.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I was directly over it. I'd have to get out the map and and see just how close. But I mean, I do remember looking out the window and.
For those who haven't done it, landing at Reagan National Airport is the closest a civilian can come to a carrier landing.
Well, it was always one of the favorite approaches because you have to fly down the Potomac.
Yeah,
and that's stay over the Potomac, and the Potomac's not a straight line, so you got to zigzag your way down the river.
You're doing lots of maneuvering, and it's a short enough runway that it's actually grandfathered in. The FAA wouldn't let you build that airport these days, and probably so basically the strategy is to sort of like get over the runway and throw the plane to the ground. So it's really kind of the closest you've ever can get to a carrier land.
It's kind of fun. That one's one of the fun ones. New York's got some fun approaches.
LaGuardia is the other one that's grandfathered in.
Because it's the runways are 7,002 feet long at LaGuardia, both the runways. They stretch out over the a couple of them. Like if you're runway 22, it stretches out over the water. So.
I came into National one time. One of the best landings I ever had was coming into National, and it was so good a landing. I mean, it was smooth as glass. And the lead flight attendant got on the intercom and said, "Those of you who haven't flown into this airport do not understand what a fantastic landing that was.
Mm-hmm.
We owe the pilot a round of applause because that was a fantastic landing."
Was in the Reagan National?
Yeah, it was in the National, and it would have been a good landing any place. It would have been a fantastic landing any place, and it was, usually it's like they get them over the runway and sort of, all right, it's now or never, throw it to the ground.
Yeah, no, I mean the thing the thing I always tell people is first most important thing is land within that first 2,000 feet of the runway, or in that we call it the touchdown zone. Land there and land on the center line. Once you can do those two things, then work on landing smoothly, because you can burn a whole lot of runway just trying to like squeak the wheels on. You can be halfway down the runway, and sometimes you could potentially have the smoothest landing you've ever had right before you run off into the grass. So
yes, which I believe technically doesn't count.
No, it does not. No longer counts as a smooth landing at that point.
But oh well. So what else did you do today? Anything else?
Otherwise, I scraped ice off my driveway. I got out a carpet cleaner and cleaned my carpets. Played a game with a friend of mine at like 6 a.m, and I did one other form of housework. One other thing.
I gave the talk I gave last week. I did again at this gaming convention, Armchair Dragoons Digital Convention. So I watched a couple of other seminars there, and then I gave a modified version of the talk I did last week, and I've since got even more notes on how I'm going to modify it again. And I think I'm going to probably break it in two. I just haven't gotten around to doing it yet because I want to beef up the front part of it, and so I'm thinking that front part's going to end up being long enough that it could be its own thing. But it was good that I did it last week on the show because it gave me an opportunity to, one of the things I found is that the first time I do a talk, I always think of a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't think of before, and I can practice it like 10 times. And it just, that first time is so substantially when it's live, it's so substantially different than all the other times. It really, sometimes I don't even know why I practice. There's always something that comes through. So yeah, no plan of attack ever survives first engagement with the enemy. There's something to it. And, I'm a war game designer and analyst in my day job, and I used to work in a building called McCarty Little Hall, named after Captain McCarty Little, who was one of the founders of professional wargaming in the U.S., and he was a naval officer, a retired naval officer who worked up in Newport. He was on the faculty there for like 20 years as a retired guy, getting no pay for it. He just had a naval pension and said, I'll go do this for fun. He was a retired lieutenant, because he was a post-Civil War guy during the time period where you could like retire as a lieutenant.
Oh yeah.
And so they ended up like making him a captain after the fact. At some point they promoted him to captain so that he could get the retired pay of a captain. But he wrote an article about naval wargaming, and one of the things he talked about was that you can talk through a problem all day long, but when you actually get two sides fighting it out in a war game, they think of stuff that they wouldn't thought of normally. They're able to, their minds become engaged. That competitive spirit really pushes them to do better than they would normally. And the end result of that is that it's just better to do it that way. Mm-hmm. So, and that generally seems to work out. But I think the same thing applies to doing presentations. It's when it's live, when you're in front of an audience, or when you're recording it for real, right? When it's not practice, it's a different thing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed.
But so
yeah. So how was and you were doing a presentation today, right?
Yeah. So that was a Zoom thing. It's going to end up on YouTube at some point. In fact, it may already be there. The plan was to stream it live to YouTube, I think, and I don't know whether they actually did that or not. They were doing that with Zoom. I have mixed luck trying to stream stuff from Zoom, but I think he had OBS in there somewhere. And it seems to be the case that OBS sounds like it's pretty bulletproof. Mm-hmm. It's a freeware app. There's Windows and Mac versions. It's one of the handful of tools that is always mentioned for the people that really, really sort of get into streaming stuff.
Okay.
Streaming and recording and stuff like that. But it's more along the lines of the thing that, like if you had multiple cameras, you might have OBS to do it with. That sort of stuff. It gives you a lot of the same effects that StreamYard does in terms of like Chiron type features and stuff, as I understand it. But even more control. It's not doing it all through a web browser. So.
Okay.
So Rob Davidoff says the talk is now up on their video channel. That's good. Which means I need to go and download it, because I always make a point of downloading everything I do on YouTube and getting the transcript of it. Because sometimes I think of something when I'm doing a presentation that's like, ooh, I need to remember that, but I'm kind of busy right now. I can't write it down.
Gotcha.
So speaking of presentations, we talked about doing the Akira this week.
Yeah. So, we've been kind of talking about the Akira, and I thought it's an interesting ship to talk about. So I thought that we could talk about the Akira today, and kind of how it's a departure from, your average Starfleet ship. So yeah, if everyone's up for it, I'll talk about the Akira tonight. Okay,
that sounds good. So don't forget to hit the hide button. I forgot to hit the little hide button last week. So
sure, I will attempt to remember that.
With the little, yeah.
So I'll start bringing it up now, and sharing screen is easy. right.
Okay, can you reshare it and only share the PowerPoint?
I thought that's what I was doing.
No, I think you shared the entire window.
Okay. So let's do this. Oh, I suspect I have not pressed that button. Okay, is that up now?
No.
Oh, great. Okay, let's try this one more time. Share screen. Now we do this.
Aha.
Okay. All right. And I will hide that. Okay, so today, so this is the Akira, and we're going to talk about the capabilities. There's lots of videos on the internet about it, and there's a little bit of controversy with the Akira over what its kind of what its capabilities are and stuff like that, or what it has. So we're going to take a kind of a deeper dive into kind of the tactical capabilities of the ship and stuff like that, and talk about that. And this is all, of course, speculation. There's very little canon information on it. So what we're going to do, so basically what we're going to do is we're going to just kind of look at quick review of phasers and photon torpedoes. We did an entire stream about it several episodes ago, or geez, at this point, 20 episodes ago. But we'll talk about, we'll just review that a little bit, because that's a key part of this. There's several controversial topics with regard to the Akira. And then I'll talk about some advantages and disadvantages, and then some tactical options it would use in battle. So without further ado, we'll talk about just kind of a brief weapons comparison here between phasers and photon torpedoes. So phasers, so it's got a range about 300,000 kilometers. So that's 1 light second. And that's typically, when you look through most of the stuff, and in the tech manuals, they say phasers have a range of 300,000 kilometers. And they state that, so I treat that as the effective range. I'm assuming the beam doesn't just completely dissipate or hit a wall at exactly 300,000. So it probably continues on, but I would assume the effectiveness begins to drop off after 300,000 kilometers. Because they move at the speed of light, phasers generally are not going to be that useful at warp. And of course, there are certain mistakes made in some episodes here and there. And again, we're sticking generally with next generation tech when I'm talking about this stuff. The original series, obviously some of the tech stuff doesn't stay consistent between the original series and next generation, but we're generally talking about that. Now, torpedoes are generally their warp, their weapon, the weapon of choice when they're at warp. So photon torpedoes, generally they take a little bit longer to arm. They move a little bit slower. They've got to actually accelerate when they launch. But at warp, we generally believe they've got a range of about 3.5 million kilometers. The other thing is the Deep Space Nine Tech Manual talks about sort of a standard torpedo tube. And I think they're talking about the tubes on the base when they talk about this, but they're not that specific. But they talk about generally a standard tube can load 4 torpedoes in 15.3 seconds. And then it can load the other 2 after another 15.3 seconds. So you're talking 30 seconds in total. And then it could fire a full 6 torpedo burst, or presumably you could fire a single burst of 4 torpedoes. Now, compared to the Galaxy class, it's got a Mark 80 photon torpedo launcher, and that launcher could fire a total of 10 torpedoes in 1 solid burst. However, it can only load 4 at a time. So presumably And the the Star Trek Next Generation Tech Manual, I don't believe they gave any specific times for how long it took to load. So kind of combining, kind of using the Deep Space Nine Tech Manual as sort of a guide for how long it takes to arm and load a torpedo. But the Galaxy class, it does say, can only load 4 at a time, and then it would fire them. Now, those torpedo tubes are fairly long. I believe 30 some meters was kind of was the length of the torpedo tube that we had come upon or determined. So you can see, so that can be, and that doesn't necessarily include the entire compartment and the magazine and other things. And of course, it could be stacked vertically, where it is, some of that equipment is stacked vertically on multiple decks, perhaps. So different ships could probably have different setups. So in Next Generation, the ships use collimated phaser arrays. Those are those giant phaser strips we see around the ship. Most notably, the Akira uses the Type 10 phasers, which is the same type used on the Galaxy class. So I think it has, a lot of the Galaxy class type technology on that ship for the most part. Nice thing is they're not mechanical turrets, so you don't have to wait for the turret to swivel and point at the target. These are just beams, and it just fires off of the arrays. On the Galaxy class, they talk about it's got that entire strip on the top surface is about 200 emitters total. And apparently, according to the Star Trek Tech Manual, it's 5.1 million watts per emitter. So you multiply that by 200, you get 1,020 megawatts with an effective range of 300,000 kilometers. So now I kind of measured the Akira's strip and the Galaxy strip, and I would say, roughly speaking, the Akira's phaser strip on the top is about half the size of that of the Galaxy class. Many of the sources say that the Akira has 6 Type 10 phasers. And I have only, looking at models, I've only ever been able to count 3. So we'll talk about that in a little bit here. But there's one on top of the saucer of the Akira class. And then when you go on the bottom side of the saucer, the phaser strip is divided into 2 smaller strips because the sort of the secondary, the hull underneath the saucer kind of breaks up the two phaser strips. So, and this is one of my favorite examples of the Mark 10 or the Type 10 phaser in action. You can see it can fire essentially any direction, and they're of course whaling on a poor Cardassian ship. And if you can see, behind the first Galaxy in the foreground is another Galaxy. So when the first Galaxy gets done with that Galler class cruiser or destroyer, the second Galaxy class is going to finish them off. But these are the Type 10 phasers. They are kind of the modern standard phaser for the Federation at this point. Now, photon torpedoes. So, like I said, about 3.5 million kilometers. The modern warheads, as of the TNG era, they have about a 1.5 kilogram of deuterium antimatter, and the warheads can be set with variable yields. The normal yield is 18 isotons. I don't know what an isoton is, but it's often been estimated that 64 megatons is about sort of at least the nuclear bomb equivalent of the photon torpedo. So we already talked about the loading speed from the DS9 Tech Manual there. In the movie Generations, they included a specific time to lock onto a target, to lock onto a missile launched from an unknown location. So I don't remember what that time was, but I think Worf said something like 7 seconds to lock onto the target that perhaps appears from a cloaked vessel or something like that. So the Galaxy class has 2 Mark 85 torpedo launchers. One's forward and one is aft. And I think technically it's got a third one. The tech manual talks about the saucer section has an aft torpedo launcher, so it can presumably run away from somebody and shoot at them while they're running. But we never really see that one on screen. Now, the Constitution-class Enterprise cruiser, and I'm pointing these out so we can compare and speculate on the Akira later, but the Constitution class and the Enterprise class cruisers appear to be able to launch a spread of 4 torpedoes from their 2 tubes. And now the big thing with the Akira is we don't know what the firing rate of the Akira's photon torpedo tubes are. Though I speculate it's a smaller volley than most of the other torpedo tubes and ships, and I'll get into why in just a moment. So, and generally, the power required to arm the torpedo and run the torpedo system, I believe it counts for multiple things. I don't think it's just a mechanical arm shoving a tube or shoving a torpedo into a tube and somebody presses the fire button and it's that simple. I mean, we're talking about a weapon that if it happened to go off inside your ship would probably blow it up. And especially since you have a pressurized hull and all that kind of stuff. So, and you know, you don't have the benefit necessarily of your shielding and all of that kind of stuff protecting you. So there'd have to be a lot of safety since we at least speculate that they have to load antimatter into the torpedo tubes or into the individual torpedoes as they're arming them. So obviously, if you're squirting antimatter into metal tubes, most likely you need to have a pretty good safety system so you don't blow up your ship. So that's an existential threat to the, you know, if they get that wrong or if it malfunctions in some way, the safety on that would be very, very important. The launcher mechanism, it's basically kind of a railgun. It initially propels the torpedo when launched. And that probably powers up and then there's some form of propulsion system in the torpedo tube or in the torpedo itself. And they talk about having warp sustainer engines in those things. So presumably there's a handoff in there. Plus you also have the whole target tracking, weapon lock, and any electronic warfare to help you target your the opposing ship and make sure your weapon hits and doesn't get distracted by some form of jamming or another. So now, with sort of the basics out of the way, there's several controversial topics about the Akira. Was it designed in response to the Cardassian border wars, or was it a result of the Borg incursion? The other thing is they talk about it having 15 torpedo tubes. I mean, really, that seems like a lot. And it took me a long time to come around to believing that it had a lot of torpedo tubes. I just thought it was kind of silly because it completely defied everything else about every other Starfleet ship. But these differences do make it kind of interesting, actually, compared to other Starfleet ships. And by the way, it's a carrier. So it's true. It's a carrier, and there's enough evidence of this. So I'll go into each of these 3 things, and we'll kind of hit them one by one. Now, first, just to kind of give you a comparison, and this is a rough size comparison between the various ships. We have the Galaxy, 642 meters long, and it's got the big Type 10 phaser strip there along the top. 200 emitters. Now, I kind of measured it, and I have roughly that the Akira's phaser strip is about half the size of the Enterprise's, the Galaxy class phaser strip. And you'll see it doesn't go all the way around the primary hull. So to the extent that limits the arcs, I'm not sure how much it actually does, but certainly it's not as large, so it's not going to be as powerful as the Galaxy's phaser. And it's 464 meters long. And then compare that to the old Excelsior class, about 511 meters long. And the Akira is also about 3 million metric tons. So It's roughly 67% the weight of a Galaxy class ship.
So,
And
Pat,
go ahead.
what do you mean by powerful in this context? Does it mean that it can't, that the power of the beam is not as powerful, or does it just mean that it can't fire as long, or if it has to run the beam around the outside like you see it do when either it or the target's maneuvering, that it just doesn't have. This is one of the things about phaser strips that I've never fully understood.
And I believe the tech manual talks about having enough juice in that thing for the Galaxy class, anyways, to fire for continuous fire for about 45 minutes. Now, I suspect there's still a limited amount of output, but I do believe, because it does talk about each one of the emitters is 5.1 megawatts, and when you put all that together, it sounds like the output of the Galaxy class is 1,020 megawatts, at maximum power. So I would assume that the larger phaser strip makes it more powerful as well. And then, from there, it's up to your power systems and whatever, whether it's capacitors, batteries, or generators, feeding them directly.
I'd actually kind of think that maybe if it is 100 emitters versus 200 emitters, that might be something that's more along the lines of it just can't shoot at as many targets at once.
Well, I actually think these type of phaser strips can break up that power into multiple shots if they need to, and we see them do it a few times. There's the episode Conundrum where they wake up after getting knocked out and they don't have any memory. And in their analysis of the ship, as they're trying to figure out who's in charge and where they are, they determine, oh, we're a battleship. And then at some point, a group of fighters come after them, and it just Galaxy just flicks a bunch of little phaser shots to make them go away.
Okay.
So I think that firepower can divide up into multiple beams. Like, there would be no point attacking a Galaxy class ship with, a swarm of missiles. I believe it would, assuming it can target those missiles and all that kind of stuff, it would just, this would be, an Aegis cruiser's dream. So,
yeah, I mean, it seems like the unit, when it's building a fire pattern, the unit that it's using is the emitter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you could have some number of emitters sort of working in tandem, or they could be doing separate things. There might be some fire control limitations on there.
Yeah, and it could be, if we go back here, we see them firing two separate beams, and it could be they were trying to punch two separate holes, hit the shield in two separate locations, so that next Galaxy coming right behind it, Galaxy 1 has poked a hole in the shields that the next Galaxy is going to take advantage of and finish it off. There's that concept through beta canon and stuff called shield dimpling. You use your phasers to poke a hole in the shield and then lob a bunch of photon torpedoes right through that hole, so it can explode against the hull. Neat little tricks like that.
Okay.
So, and then, so most of this information is based on the DS9 tech manual, and it's got some sketchy things. Like, if you look at the Norway and the Sabre class ship, they have the exact identical stats. So someone, there was a copy and paste problem, I believe, somewhere in there, but like down to the fraction of a meter, they are the precise same length and width. So, I haven't laid that out to measure to figure out which one's proportionately correct to which ship. But in this slide, these are roughly to scale. So we can see the Defiant down there is at 170 meters long, and then this is the Burrell class bird of prey. According to just a little bit of trivia, don't know if anyone can see this, but according to Rick Sternbach's Bird of Prey book, the cavort in that is 350 meters long. So it would be, it would be, 2/3 the length or so of the Akira class. All right. The Burrell's length, that was based off the Bird of Prey Owner's Manual from Sternbach. And then this is a comparison of the other more modern designs. It's not to scale. But I tend to believe that the Akira takes a little more of its design aesthetic from the Galaxy class than it does from some of these other ships. So I kind of believe it was on the drawing board a little bit before, quite a bit before the Battle of Wolf 359. And if you look at the windows in there, and I'm not too big on window analysis, but if you look at the windows on the Akira class, they're the same style of windows as the Galaxy class. However, its escape pods tend to be more similar to what we see of the more advanced the escape pods on the more advanced ships. So just a little bit there. So anyways, like I said, I tend to believe that the Akira, clearly I tend to believe it was on the drawing boards before the Saber and the Norway and the Steamrunner class were. And certainly, go ahead.
I was going to say it's probably worth pointing out that there are other sources that have different links for the Akira.
Yes.
Star Trek Online has it at under 400 meters, a little bit under 400 meters. And there was another source that had it at like 420, if I remember correctly.
Yep. These lengths and tonnages are based off of the DS9 Tech Manual. Yeah. So I don't claim religious devotion to any particular source.
And
because there is a large variety of information out there sometimes.
It makes the analysis harder across the board because were you there when we were talking about the bridge for the bridge conversation, or had you already bailed at that point?
I think I had bailed at that point.
Yeah, so we ended up spending some time talking about the bridge and like what exactly is the bridge on that? Is it because there's sort of like the place where the bridge normally is, there's a structure, and you could look at either the top dome on the structure or the thing that it's on. Mm-hmm. And you got different answers as to what's reasonable depending upon whether, if it's 464, the top dome is more than capable of being the bridge all by itself. If it's 388 or whatever that other number was, then it has to be the lower structure. Mm-hmm. And so that's consistently a problem with things where you don't have canon numbers, as you well know, but for everybody else, that's consistently a problem if you don't have actual canon numbers to try to figure out what fits where, made worse by the fact that sometimes the people who did the special effects don't know. They just sort of did something that looks cool. We saw that with Birds of Prey throughout a couple of Star Trek series where, this time it's the size of a phone booth and the next time it's the size of a battle cruiser. Yeah.
Sometimes even within the same movie.
Yeah.
Let's see here. So the other thing I tend to believe that it was made for a more conventional threat was because there's at least some information out there that indicates photon torpedoes were not as effective as phasers against the Borg. So, and the Akira is a torpedo boat. So, like I said, I tend to go, and Cardassians tend to use shorter range beam weapons as opposed to torpedo weapons. Therefore, a really fast torpedo boat makes a lot of sense for use against Cardassians, against an enemy that you can outrange them that way. The other thing is Akira's fast. They talk about it being capable of warp 9.8 for 12 hours, instead of 9.6 for the Galaxy and many of the other ships. Also, the Galler class, I believe the max speed observed, according to the show, was 9.6. So there we go. Okay, so let's get into the torpedo launchers here real quick. So the DS9 tech manual says there's two. The book Starship Spotter, it says it's got 15 Mark 80 direct fire photon torpedo tubes. And I believe their info was based off of the original Star Trek magazine, where they had an article about the Akira, 15 torpedo tubes, it's a carrier, all this kind of stuff. And that was generally the designer's intent. So let's go through some pictures here and take a look, and we can count torpedo launchers and see what we come up with. So first, zoomed into that original picture there. This is one of the most useful pictures in the presentation. So we see there are 4 torpedo tubes in this upper weapons pod right here. We actually see the Akira in first contact firing torpedoes out of this weapons pod. So, and they are symmetrical. They're the same size for the most, or at least as far as I can tell, they're the same size. And so we got 4 torpedo tubes forward. Next. And here's a better picture. Now, there have also been multiple models of the Akira made over the years. The original one for first contact was, the ship was kind of off in the background. We didn't see it in a lot of detail, so they didn't have to get into too much detail with it. Later, I believe they've redesigned it and they've redone it a little bit here and there. And so some of these other pictures I'm showing here is sort of a remastered version where basically they just made the details pop a little bit more, and up close it looked really nice. So these are those 4 tubes in the forward torpedo launcher here. Then if we look at one of the older models,
where are the models from again?
I'm sorry?
Where are the models from again?
So the first one was the very first model they made was for Star Trek First Contact.
Right.
And it was off in the distance for the most part. I believe this other sort of more high definition model, if you want to call it that, was for these, as I understand it, my information says that this was for the Eagle Moss sculpt. But there's still some differences between this sort of high definition model and the Eagle Moss sculpt itself. So
okay. So where'd the high def one come from?
The information I have is it was redesigned, and I don't remember the name of the designer, but it was redesigned intended to make a little bit more definition, because the model from First Contact was not defined enough to make a model and sell it to people.
Okay, so it's like a Star Trek designer. I mean, it's a Canon source ish.
Yeah, to the extent Eagle Moss is Canon, sure.
Okay, they're both Eagle Moss?
No. This first design.
Okay, but
the first design was from the movie First Contact.
The one on the left is from First Contact.
Yes, this one here on the left is First Contact.
And the one on the right is Eagle Moss.
Yes, if my information is correct, yes,
okay.
It's Eagle Moss. Yep, got it. So that one, in this first one, you can kind of see 3 tubes and what looks like half a tube. And some people speculated that there's a cylinder in here that could spin around and spit out torpedoes, but I'm not sure what world that would make sense in. So they kind of got rid of that. And then on this model here, we can see 3 distinct tubes firing to the aft and port. And then there'd be 3 more tubes over here to the aft and starboard. So on this weapons pod, and you can see the 3 on the aft side here. So on this weapon pod itself, you're looking at 10 torpedo tubes right there. So next, in First Contact, we also see an Akira class ship fire 4 photon torpedoes from the underside, near, kind of coming from near the navigational deflector. So presumably there's a torpedo tube or tubes in there, but I don't have a good picture of it, and so this is the one that's kind of the question mark. And then over here, and this is the starboard side of the saucer section, we can see that there are 2 torpedo tubes right here. These look like fuzzy intel photos, like the Cardassians taking pictures across the border with a big telescope or something. But we see 2 torpedo tubes on the starboard side, and then there's 2 more torpedo tubes on the port side. So that brings us to 10 torpedo tubes here on the weapons pod, 4 torpedo tubes in the saucer, and then if we estimate that there are 3 torpedo tubes underneath the near the navigational deflector, if we said there's 3, that comes out to a total of 17 tubes. So we can confirm 14 tubes, and then there is a number, maybe 1 to 4 tubes underneath the navigational deflector. So my estimate, I kind of believe there's 3 tubes. My estimate is 3 tubes near the navigational deflector. There's some information to support that. So I really come up with 17 tubes. So that's what I got there. So yes, does it have a whole lot of torpedo tubes? Yeah, the model pretty much confirms it. Whether you want to say there's 12 in the weapons pod, it's 4, 4, and 4, or there's just 10 in the weapons pod, that's still a lot of torpedo tubes. Now, and the only other thing I would say is with those torpedo tubes here in the side, I don't know exactly what 30 meters would look like, but I would be under the impression that these torpedo tubes in the Akira are probably shorter than what the larger torpedo tubes that we see on the Galaxy class. So I don't believe that it's spitting out 170 torpedoes in one giant volley. I just don't believe it could do that. It's my belief that those torpedo tubes are partially there for redundancy, because the Borg tend to, if you're in battle, redundancy is certainly helpful against the Borg, but redundancy is always helpful in battle as you take damage, and that's how the Klingons design their ships.
So what really bothers me about this torpedo tube analysis?
What's that?
The idea that you're schlepping antimatter around the ship to squirt into all those different torpedo tubes all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in most ships, the torpedo tubes are usually fairly concentrated, like you see in the Miranda, right?
Yep.
And so you're close to the engines, or you're close to where the warp core is. You're close to where the antimatter supply is, and so you can squirt antimatter in pretty easily. And you've got all that stuff sort of centralized because basically any place you've got a photon torpedo tube is a place where the explosion that's going to destroy your ship could start. And so you'd kind of want to have that stuff kind of centralized, so that the less antimatter piping I have to run through, the less likely it is that one of those pipes is going to have a problem.
Right.
And so it makes me really kind of wonder why you would want to. I mean, I understand why you would want to have torpedoes pointing out in all directions. I'm just.
No, that would definitely be a challenge with the ship. And the other thing is all of these separate areas. If you concentrate all your torpedo tubes in one basic area, then you get some economy of scale and you're not using up quite as much space. All of these torpedo tubes would come with maintenance requirements. That means extra crew, which means extra life support. And obviously they're using up space, and you're going to have multiple magazines throughout the ship also taking up space, plus the safety and the machinery and all the other equipment that goes along with the photon torpedo. So it would definitely use up a lot of space. Now, Akira the carrier. So it has a hangar, and basically the idea is that it's a through deck carrier. So if you can see my pointer here, these here where I've got this circle, these are basically the doors for the front of the hangar. And then in the back side, we have hangar door 1 and hangar door 2. So this runs the length of the saucer section, and it would have fighters, shuttles stored throughout the saucer section here. Now, and these are some deck plans. I won't go in, like Andy. Andy's not a fan of these, but so to the extent that these are accurate, it's a pretty packed in area for this hangar, and it only shows half of the hangar. Presumably, there's an identical other half on the other side here. But so my general impression is it appears to be there's 5 Peregrine fighters on this side, probably 5 more on the other side. Maybe there's a couple more hidden someplace else. Plus, you got various shuttle pods throughout the hangar here. So it can. Now, I don't get the impression that a fighter landing in this bay is coming in hot.
Yeah,
that's a pretty narrow area, to fly a fighter in at high speed or something like that as you try to land.
I'm with Andy in that I think that's kind of
it's
I have real problems with these blueprints.
It's packed in kind of tight. I would be willing to bet that there's a little more space in here. But the other thing with these blueprints is up here on the side, you'd have a big torpedo room taking up space also for the torpedo. So the point is, depending on how far the hangar comes in here, would limit the size of your torpedo launcher, which means you probably have smaller torpedo tubes, which means it's probably not shooting off as many torpedoes as your average Federation ship, which only has 1 or 2 tubes.
The other thing is that it's worth doing some thinking about whether you think that those are 5 Peregrine fighter slots or 10, depending upon how high that bay is
and how much they stack it there. Yep.
Yeah, because you've got tractor beams, right? So you don't need to. At a regular airport, you don't have the option of having one of your airplanes levitate over another airplane to get to its docking portal, right?
That's true.
Whereas you do have the option of doing that in a Federation starship. And so if you look at some of that artwork about the cargo bay on the Enterprise refit, where it's got sort of the area in the back where the modules are clearly stacked, they clearly have their own little slots to go into. It seems to me that it makes sense to do that with fighters also. And so, you need to have that central bay open because you might have to move something up and over something else. But when you're sort of slotting them into their little bays that they live in, you can pack them in a little bit tighter.
Yep.
You going to talk about the warp core discussion?
I was going to mention that later on. Okay. Basically, that's
something that's worth. When we get there, we'll remember this bit where somebody decided that the right answer was to build this big structure in the middle of the hangar bay, which
right.
I don't believe.
I'm not sure you'd put I don't know that you'd have a bunch of structures right in the middle of the hangar bay. That doesn't sit well with me. Now, we actually are at a good stopping point here. We are 5 minutes to the end of our time, and what remains is to talk about specific tactical advantages and disadvantages of the Akira, and talking about specific tactical scenarios that Akira can get into. So rather than start on that and leave everybody hanging, mid-slide, I think this is a good point to stop for the week. And then next week we can hit the advantages and disadvantages and the different tactical options for the Akira.
can we talk about warp cores then, real quick?
Let's talk about warp cores, Chris.
Okay, so Andy, or he mentioned Andy. Pat mentioned Andy Presby, a friend of ours who literally has a degree in spacecraft design, and who's been a Star Trek fan since before he had a degree in spacecraft design, and he's a retired submarine officer, etc. And so we've been doing a lot of thinking about a game we're about to play, because that's going to be our starship for the Star Trek Adventures game. One of the conclusions that Andy reached was that this is a ship that has more than one warp core. And part of that is that if you look at like the Eagle Moss model, for example, there's two circles about where you'd expect maybe a warp core to be, that are basically one sort of associated with each of those booms, sort of where the boom comes into the saucer section. There is no obvious warp core ejection hatch that's closer to the center line. There's a hatch on top that is hypothesized, that's a bigger one, that's hypothesized to be a captain's yacht, and I want to say that was from some sort of official source. I don't remember exactly where it came from though. And so, his hypothesis is that you've got two warp cores, in which case having that big structure in the middle of the hangar bay is a lot less likely, because one part of that structure was the warp core. The more I look at this ship, the weirder the design gets, because when you start thinking in terms of, I want to take a turbo lift, I want to route a turbo lift from point A to point B. It's almost Star Warsian in the convolution you have to go through to do stuff, right? Somebody made the comment that in the Star Wars universe, if you want to flush your toilet, you have to go out to your mailbox. And this is really kind of the way that the Akira looks. Like, if you want to get from point A to B, you can do it any way you want, except by going from point A to point B. You have to sort of go around everything with that if you've got that big bay in the middle. Hey, Pat, I can't hear you. You're muted.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Having a hangar bay in the middle of your saucer, presumably it just means you've got to use the turbo lifts out more on the fringes of the saucer section, and perhaps even turbo lifts go up and over along the top of the hangar and curve on in. We know that the turbo lifts don't necessarily have to go straight up and down; they go
right
laterally as well.
But yeah, there's.
Yeah, no. If the bridge is at the top and you have a hangar, the solutions are all kind of weird.
Yeah.
I can dream up several different solutions for it. None of them are the standard convenient. I'm at the bottom of the saucer. I'm going to take a turbo lift directly to the bridge. Maybe not.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting design. Interesting.
Yeah. I think given some of that, like we talked about, I'd maybe put the bridge at the bottom, and now you have a lot of space in your hangar and stuff like that too. So
I like the idea also. I mentioned this the other night when we were talking. I like the idea also of taking the navigational deflector, basically swapping the navigational deflector in the bridge, put the navigational deflector between the two sponsons, because then it's, you can have warp plasma conduits running there, so the navigational deflector is going to be a power hog, so you can easily tap into the power supply there, and I think it fits better, and I think it makes the ship look better, because the ship looks great from all angles except from the side. From the side, it sort of looks goofy with the big navigational deflector hump underneath it. It kind of makes the ship look off balanced. And as I said to you earlier, Pat, people have this tendency, they'll say things like, the bridge is between the sponsons to help protect the bridge. Well, then why don't you just build the bridge into the middle of the ship? Because with the way the weapons are so powerful, it doesn't matter. right? You know, a shot
Yeah.
against a ship without a shield is going to destroy the ship. It's like, okay, pick one of those statements. One of those statements is defensible, but by definition, they both
can't have both
defensible at the same time.
Yeah.
So
yes, indeed. Now, one of the I just saw one of the questions in there, and basically he was saying, or he was asking what the fighter complement is. In the grand scheme of things, it kind of is sort of whatever's good in your own head canon. But you know, I kind of like 12 myself. 40 seems, depending on how much of the hangar is devoted, or how much of that saucer is devoted to the hangar, maybe you do have 40. However, it's got a crew of 500, and if you start thinking about the amount of support crew and pilots you need to be carrying around to man a wing of 3 squadrons, let's say, but the initial designer's intent and the magazine article says 40 fighters plus a bunch of shuttles and stuff like that. So, you know, and there is no canon source as to what it is. So it's kind of whatever you think can fit in that saucer, which is probably around 200 meters long. And just for reference, an aircraft carrier is about 300 meters long, 280, 290 meters long, something like that. So, depending on how many.
The hangar bay is probably of an aircraft carrier is probably about 200 meters long, because it doesn't extend the full.
It does. It's not the full length of the ship. Yeah, you're right. So, anyway, yeah, could you, in theory, then from there we'd want to compare the size of a Peregrine fighter and a runabout and all that kind of stuff compared to your average tactical aircraft on an aircraft carrier. And I think they tend to come out, I think the Peregrine, some of the estimates in the runabouts were about 20 meters long. So about 60 feet roughly. Yeah. So I have not sat down with graph paper and sketched out, you know, I have not done my own deck plans of the Akira, so I haven't done that deep. My analysis has not gone that deep to figure out exactly what it could be. The only thing I'll say is that if you've got 15 torpedo tubes, you've got 2 warp reactors, all of those 2 things, just those 2 things alone, use up a ton of space in that ship. You've got a crew of 500 people. So that ship has to give up something somewhere. It is, I mean, it's a pretty big ship, but with an unusual amount of torpedo tubes and weaponry and a hangar bay and a, you know, some sort of air wing, basically. The staff for all of that's eating into a lot of your crew. Plus, with 2 warp reactors, just my opinion, this would be a good argument to have over some beers, is how much does that increase your engineering staff as well?
Yeah.
So with all those things, you're giving up, you know, if you've only got, and most of the source, I think all the sources are consistent, crew of 500 people. So, and being a combat ship, your Starship Combat Tactical staff is going to be a little bit larger also. So that doesn't leave a lot of room for laboratories and scientists and medical staff and all this other stuff. So somewhere along the way it gives up, and that's where we'll talk about next week is what are the potential disadvantages that this ship has, because it's got to be somewhere. You never get you don't get something for nothing. There is always a cost to be paid.
I'd say they probably had to give up the karaoke bar, but there are pilots on board, so they probably do have the karaoke.
I'm sure they could improvise a karaoke bar somewhere, but there are pilots aboard. You're right.
There's got to be an O Club. There's got to be an O Club.
Exactly. So, all right. Well, it's we're a little past our time, so I think this is probably a good spot to sign off and say thank you to Lissa.
Thank you, as always, Lissa.
And thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We really enjoy doing this, and hit the like and subscribe buttons. That'll help this whole channel out and help everybody out. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
And nothing we said is the official position of our employers.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you for running the banner, Alyssa. That's why I chime in on that earlier.
Yeah. As far as I know, my none of my jobs have an official position on the Akira's tactical capabilities, but who knows?
All right. Thank you very much, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everyone. See you. Bye.